First full weekend of the college football season. Iowa State has Southeast Missouri State. And then, of course, the following week, it's the rivalry with Iowa, and then much more. They play Baylor before the end of September in fact, less than a month. So that's a great game up in Ames. We're now joined by Travis Hines, the Des Moines Register, joins us covering Iowa State and the Big 12 on 365 Sports. Travis, how would you say the anticipation for this team was or is compared to really where they've been the last couple of years?
It's certainly very different. I mean, I think we've gone into certainly the previous two seasons and maybe three with Iowa State fans really looking at it as a potential for not just a special season, but historic seasons. And they got that one out of the 3 years with the Fiesta Bowl championship back in 2020. You know, things certainly did not go the way people had hoped with last year opening the season in the top 10 and finishing 7-6. And now when you look at the roster, the amount of turnover, not just in terms of the number, but the quality, the names that you know, guys that have been All-Americans, whether it's Breece Hall or Mike Rose, Charlie Kohler, the Brock Purdy, the all-time winningest quarterback in program history. All those guys are gone. So this is a very different team. I think they have a very different set of expectations, but not to the extent of where we've seen Iowa State previous to the Matt Campbell era, where a rebuilding season probably meant trying to scratch out 2 or 3 wins. I think for this team and its fan base, a bowl is still a hope, if not an expectation. And I think when you look at still the players they have coming back and the level to which they've recruited over the last 3, 4, 5 years, I think that's a realistic expectation and hope. Now we'll see if they can get to it, but this is a team that is certainly turning a page into a new era with so many of the stars of the last 2 years moving on.
Does their style of play that, you know, their goal is to be very fundamentally sound? I mean, nobody's going to confuse this for a Mike Leach offense. Does that make it easier to transition now from, you know, group of quarterback and skill players to the next one?
I think it makes it easier because they're they focus so much on those fundamentals, the ball control, leading with defense, that they're likely to just be in a lot of close games. You know, when you look at the difference, you know, really between 2019, 2020, and 2021 for Iowa State, the biggest difference is winning one-score games. When they win one-score games, they have the ability to, you know, have that special season. When they lose those games, it kind of drifts off into mediocrity a little bit. But I think the fact that you've seen that now for 3-4 years, where Iowa State continues to be in close games, is certainly a function of their style of play. And I don't think that will change this year, where because they're probably going to be leading with their defense, and I don't anticipate that defense taking a big step back, they're going to be in a lot of games. Now the question is, with a rookie quarterback, you know, with an unproven offensive line and running back and still some, you know, replacing a lot of contributors defensively, are they going to have enough to get over the hump in those close games?
You know, that's when you mention these one-score games, we just saw a former rival of Iowa State and how they have been awful in the one-score games in Nebraska, and then another one, and this just killed that program. A lot of other things have as well. Baylor last year, they won those games. And I don't know if you can count on that year in and year out. Can you, Travis?
I think it makes it difficult. I mean, certainly if you ask any coach, I think they would prefer just to win games by 35. That would be the way to go. But I think what Matt Campbell has recognized and been pretty upfront about at Iowa State is they're probably not consistently going to recruit the level of athlete and football player at scale where you can be an Ohio State, an Alabama, you know, a Texas at its peak, an Oklahoma at its peak, that you're probably going to have to steal one of his phrases, win in the margins. And that means winning close games. But it certainly sets you up for a season like last year where really everything was set up for Iowa State to have its historic season, but they could just not close out close games. I mean, that game in Waco a year ago, you know, really hinges on a botched special teams by Iowa State, which has been an Achilles heel for them really for the last 3 or 4 years. So that, while I think certainly they would love to win blowouts, I don't think that's in their DNA. I don't think that's in their blueprint. But even if you put an emphasis and a focus on winning close games, you are leaving a lot to chance just by nature of how chaotic a college football game can be. So certainly, if you're going to be putting yourself in that position, a lot can go right, but a lot can go wrong.
Where do you feel they stack up with the rest of the Big 12 right now as the season starts?
I think they're in the middle of the pack. Maybe I think we see this a lot in the Big 12 where sometimes you can have that front runner, take a big step forward, and then you have, the cellar is pretty well defined, and then it really comes down to those one-score games in the middle. And I think Iowa State's somewhere in there. I think with their lack of experience at key positions, most notably that quarterback positions, with Hunter Deckers, who is a third-year player in the system but has never started a game. Iowa State is high on him, but he still does not have the game reps that I think make you feel really good about being in those close games. So I think it's going to be an uphill battle for Iowa State, but I do think with what they have defensively, they still have a lot of guys back in the secondary that makes them formidable. Will McDonald, as a defensive end, is one of the best pass rushers in college football. So I do think they're going to have the opportunity to win some games, but it seems to be it's going to come down to how do they score points and how consistently can they do that with a new quarterback and a new running back, replacing, Breece Hall, one of the best running backs that the school's ever had.
Can Brock be more we saw a little bit of him. And obviously, Breece Hall is a fantastic player, drafted high in the NFL. How good can Brock be? Not trying to compare him to Breece Hall, but how good can he be?
That's the $1 million question around names right now, because if you look back into that recruiting class, Breece Hall and Jirel Brock came in together, and Jirel Brock was pretty considerably the more well-regarded recruit of those two, before Breece Hall emerged midway through his true freshman season as, really being special. And we just haven't seen enough of Brock to really know. I think, certainly the staff was high on him. They have some youngsters in the program that they like a lot too. But I think the question for Iowa State fans isn't necessarily, is Jirel Brock going to be this dynamic back? The question is the next great Iowa State back on the roster, regardless of who it is? Because if you look at Matt Campbell's tenure, before Breece Hall was David Montgomery, who now plays for the Chicago Bears and was fantastic for Iowa State. Prior to coming to Iowa State at Toledo, he had Kareem Hunt and David Fluellen. So obviously NFL running backs as well. So the question, I think Iowa State fans look at it as this staff knows how to evaluate running backs at a very high level. And I think there is almost an assumption that there's an NFL running back on this roster. The question is, who's it going to be? Because the last time Iowa State looked to replace one of those in David Montgomery, the job went to a senior in Kene Nwangu, and midway through the season, it was Breece Hall's job. So I think that people are going to kind of wait for a few weeks, really, I think, to have a feeling for what that running back room is really going to be like for Iowa State.
All right, Travis, you mentioned the Big 12, how it can have, with all due respect to what Oklahoma State or Baylor did last year, or on TCU one year, and Oklahoma ran the conference for a long, long time, at least from 2010 until last year. But there was a little bit of a crack last year. It doesn't mean that they're going to drop. We don't know what's going to happen with them. But how would you, if you don't mind, share who's in the upper echelon, at least right now, entering the season in the Big 12? And would that be 3 teams? Would that be 4 teams? Or is there a clump of 5? How would you say that?
It's a great question. I mean, I think Oklahoma obviously is in such a unique position with the coaching change and, not having the success last year that I think that they were hoping for. I think Kansas State's ascended. I think obviously what Baylor has done the last couple of years puts them in that conversation. But I think there's so much unknown with the league right now that it's really I think it's harder this year than maybe previous years to look at it in the preseason and really tear it out. I mean, I think we're going to find out early, who the good teams are. I remember, being in Waco last year when that Baylor team was not super well regarded. I think it was the 3rd or 4th week in September, and walking out of there being like, that Baylor team's for real. And we all saw what they did later in the year. So I think we'll know early, but I'm having a hard time really tearing out the Big 12, before the season starts, because I think the separation maybe just isn't as defined as we've seen previously.
On Matt Campbell, is the Nebraska job one that Iowa State worries that he might be attracted to?
I don't think so. I mean, I think twofold. I think one, objectively, that Nebraska job is not certainly what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I think for Iowa State fans being so close to it, they see all the warts of that job and all the challenges that present to it. We'll see what happens with Matt Campbell. I mean, I think the prevailing wisdom has always been that it would have to be an elite Midwest job, specifically Ohio State because he is an Ohio guy. Maybe Notre Dame as one that has been mentioned, or Penn State. Nebraska has not historically been one that people had kind of zeroed in on. But you never know. I mean, if Iowa State disappoints this year and Nebraska throws a lot of money, who knows? And if Iowa State does really well and Campbell can see a future here, I could see that. I mean, I think what we've seen from Matt Campbell is certainly he's not out actively searching for jobs and looking to leave at every turn. But, I mean, in this coaching business, it's hard to rule anything out. But I don't get the impression that Nebraska would be on the short list of any dream jobs for Matt Campbell.
Listen, Travis, I'm a Nebraska fan, born there back many years ago, and I agree with you exactly what you said. I said that. I'm not so sure that's a jump. That's not a jump up. Maybe financially they could put a button. They got to be careful themselves because it's not like they're just loaded. But I think right now they are on the edge of being about a 30-year desert if they don't somehow turn this thing around and get the right person, whoever that next person will be if Frost, in fact, is gone. Thank you so much for your time. We had Matt on the show during our Big 12 Media Days. He was fantastic. I know you enjoy talking to him whenever you can. Thanks for your time. Let's have a hell of a football season, okay? Travis Hines from the Des Moines Register. Iowa State, Iowa.